Alright guys, we're going to get started with this event. We just wanted to thank everyone for coming out to our second Agape Latte. We have this around once a semester. And my name is Sam Cavallas.
I'm Marcel Mitchell. To start off the event, we'd like to thank a few people that helped make this event happen. Julia Marcel. If we get a round of applause.
We also want to give a special shout out to Rob Coveley, who is not here right now, and Chris Bunn and Kira Altamari, who helped set this up. And it is my great pleasure to introduce one of the best professors on this entire campus.
Oh, he's here? I swear. I've been waiting.
He's originally from Boston, has a PhD from Iowa, and his name is Dr. Patrick McCauley.
Questions, thoughts, ideas, concerns, breakthroughs, insights, deliberations, outrages, multiple personalities, or crazy dreams you can't interpret, that kind of thing. I had to. Does anybody have any questions, first off? Good. All right. Up until, let's see, what month are we in? We're still in March? Up until December, I'd been teaching every single semester during the summers most of the time. Since 1994, and I haven't been teaching since Christmas. And I have no idea how badly this is going to go, because I'm a little out of practice about just being in front of people. But I have been doing a ton of work. I've been doing a ton of research. So I feel like, do you remember those rubber band those planes you'd wind it up? Well, you know how you could like double wind them and they would, so I'm all wound up. I'm like triple wound. I have no idea how this is going to go. But what I wanted to do today was something, if you've had classes with me or you've been to some of the presentations that I do, there are certain themes that I often hit, and today's stuff is going to be really different and really, really new. I haven't had this much chance to be a reader rather than a speaker for a long time, and I've got some new stuff. So we'll see how it works. I probably should have gone out to some comedy bars before this and see how it went. All right, I'm going to start with Jerry Spinelli in a book called Loser. Has anybody ever read this book? You've read this book? Do you like it? It's okay. Anybody else ever hear this book? This is you've heard of it? Have you read it? It's awesome. All right, so it's about a kid named Zinkoff who is uncoordinated and not that smart, and he's not good at music, and he's not good at sports, and they call him a loser, particularly after this particular sports. He's in middle school. He's actually in 5th grade and then goes into 6th grade. And the last year at 5th grade, he makes sure that his team loses the spring sports day out in the field, and they call him the loser. But he doesn't always think of himself that way. In fact, he wants to be like his dad, who's a mailman, and he thinks his dad is like a hero, capable of handling the mail in all kinds of weather, and he deeply desires to be like that, strong and capable. And one of the days he goes out with his dad, and he meets some of the people on his dad's mail route, and one of the guys that's out there is called the waiting man. And he sits by his window and he looks down the street waiting for his brother to come back from Vietnam, which was 30 years ago. And this 5th, 6th grade kid is trying to wrap his head around the fact that this guy has been sitting in his window 365 days a year for 30 years, waiting for a brother that's never coming back. And he doesn't know how to understand it. He doesn't know how to think about it. But also on his dad's mail route is a little girl who's very precocious, so her mom puts her on a leash. I put my own kid on a leash, I get it. It was a monkey leash, he really liked it, so it was only a little abusive. And one night there's a snowstorm. I'm going to read you a little bit about it. One night there's a snowstorm, and the little girl goes missing. And Zinkoff decides that he can't stand it. He's got to do something about it. There's all these sirens and lights and people looking all over, but no one can find the little girl. It's going to make sense after I explain it to you a little bit more. Okay. 2 more blocks and the sidewalk snow is untouched. He is alone. The words that have been inside him come out in a whisper. I will find her. I will find her. And he walks on. The lights from the front windows and the lights at the street corners help. It's as if they are looking too. The snowflakes in the light remind him of moths. In the darkness between the lights, he can see the snowfall. He cannot hear it. He sticks out his tongue to catch a flake. In the darkness, he calls out in a whisper, Claudia. Claudia, that's the little girl. When he whispers, he doesn't know. Maybe it's because he doesn't want to disturb the night any more than necessary. Maybe it's so she won't hear him in case she's having fun. Claudia. The snow is getting deep. It's over his ankles. He wades through it. And as he wades through the surf at the beach, it's hard to see between the lights. He whispers into the corners, the dark corners, Claudia. Next chapter. Claudia, he sends his whispers out ahead of him. He whispers his whisper is his eyes, his fingertips. Claudia. He does not know it is snowing unless he turns his face up. The snowplow doesn't come here. He's in the alleyways behind the houses. He trips over something and sprawls face down in the snow. He gets up, wipes his face. There's snow on his neck, melting under his collar. He takes his hand from his coat pockets for balance and better not to fall. He falls again. He pulls out his lucky stone. He clutches it in his hands. His hands are wet and cold. Claudia. He stumbles in the hidden potholes, lurches against the open gates, chain link fences, and who knows what all in the cold, pillowy night. He trudges on. He no longer bothers to lift his feet. Claudia, how long can she last? How long can a little girl stay warm, stay alive in a snowstorm at night? He will find her. How will he find her? I'm skipping stuff for you. He thinks of the waiting man. He wonders if the waiting man ever thought of going over to Vietnam and looking for his brother himself. And then it occurs to him, maybe he did. Maybe he did go over there, and as soon as he heard his brother was missing in action, maybe he figured he was the best one to go looking for his own brother. And maybe he went tramping up and down the jungle till his shoes wore out, and maybe he was on his second or third pair of shoes when they kicked him out because it was their jungle, not his. And so that's why he came back to the window. He had no choice. And he sees the front window of Claudia's house. Across the street from the waiting man, he sees Claudia's mother. Hears a voice from the future. Yeah, it's a shame. One night during a snowstorm, the little girl ran off. Used to wear a harness. Just took it off. Whole town came out looking for her. Even that Zinkoff kid. They looked and looked, turned the town upside down, never could find her. Now look, her mother sits in that window, waiting for her little girl to come home. Been waiting there for over 30 years. He bites down hard on his lucky stone. Claudia. I'm going to jump a little bit. He hasn't noticed, but the back house lights have gone out along the way, the kitchens, the bedrooms. He does notice, however, that something is different. Noise. The snow has become noisy, a vast brushy noise all about him as of a broom sweeping. He lifts his face. He feels tiny, prickles on his skin. It's not snow, but it's not rain either. Within minutes, the soft sweeping sound has become a chittering, as if someone above is sprinkling salt on the world. His footsteps crunch. He reaches down. The top of the snow has become crusty, slick, and cold. Crusty, not good for making snow angels. He should have made a snow angel before the snow got crusty. He wonders if Claudia is making a snow angel. He wonders if angels are invisible in the snow. He wonders if angels make people in the snow. He wonders if Claudia is an angel, ... The tiny grains of ice have turned to freezing rain that pelts his face and runs down his neck and onto his shoulders, and it wakes him up, which is quite a surprise since he didn't know he had gone to sleep in the first place. But here he is, lying not standing in the snow. He tries to push himself up, but his hand breaks through the crust, and the snow, like cold cotton, runs up inside his coat arms past his elbow. He jumps up. He flaps his arm violently to shake out the snow. The snow falls out, but try to get his icicles out of an arm to believe it. He trudges onward. His head is soaking wet. He stomps again and barks into the night. Claudia, now she's made him mad. Wait till I get a hold of you. A gleam of light, a distant voice, a funny siren, sounds like a hiccup. He says, I'm looking here, you look there, we'll find her. Or does he just think he calls? He reminds himself, Claudia's mother, the waiting man. One waiter is enough. There will be no more. There'll be no more waiters in the 900 block of Willow. Period, he says out loud, and falls asleep. He's still walking, but he's asleep as surely as any of those people behind the black windows. At this point, the little girl has been found a long time ago, but he didn't know. And he's been out for 7 hours. And they find him, a snowplow finds him at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they get him home. After the snow day comes the weekend, and by Monday, much of the snow is gone. It remains only in the shadows in the corners, north-facing surfaces of the town, and on the edges of large parking lots where the snowplows have shoved the snow into small gray mountains. The temperature is up to the low 50s, warm for December, and in gutters and alleys all over the town, water trickles toward the sewers and drains. Best of all, Monday is an in-service day at Monroe Middle School. There's something special about playing just outside the school doors while the teachers have to be inside. Kids are swarming, hockey on the parking lots, football, soccer on the fields, goofing off all over in the balmy weather. Under a canopy of arcing footballs, 2 kids, Tuttle and Bonce, are having a discussion. Tuttle is pointing. See him, that kid there? He's pointing at a kid in a yellow baseball hat. Yeah, watch this. Tuttle calls for a ball. He spins the ball in his hand and fingers the laces. Watch. He calls out to the kid, hey, yo, here you go. He winds up and fires a trim spiral at the kid, and the kid reaches out with both hands as if he's about to take a baby from somebody's arms. The ball passes nearly through the kid's hand and drills him in the chest. The kid's hat flies off, and he staggers backwards, almost falling. He scrambles to retrieve the ball. Tuttle and Bonds share the chuckle of superior athlete among the underblessed. I don't know if you've been to middle school. What a spaz, says Bonds. Look at him. He throws like a girl. He throws like a baby girl. Who is he, says Bonds. Who knows, says Tuttle. They watch as the kid calls, reaches out for someone to pass another ball to him. Let's see. But this kid, he nods toward the kid in the yellow hat. Zinkoff, says Bonds. Yeah, he don't know it. The search is over. He don't know it. The 4 of them turn to look at the kid. Bond says, the little girl is home safe and sound, and he's still out there looking for her. Jansky grins into Bonds' face. He says it slowly, for 7 hours. Tuttle shrieks, 7 hours? 7 hours, Jansky repeats. A snowplow found him at 2 o'clock in the morning, almost ran him over. He was 2 miles from home. Bond stares at the yellow-hatted kid, again is trying to punt a ball. He must have been half dead. Must have been half stupid, said Tuttle. How stupid is that, looking till 2 o'clock in the morning for someone that's already found? Hoban sneers. Could have told you. Was he froze, says Bonds. Jansky shrugs. What a wipeout, says Tuttle. Should have seen him on field day in 4th grade, said Hoban. Yeah, says Tuttle. Bad, huh? Hoban doesn't answer. They all stare at the kid who is now running this way and that, trying to entice someone to throw him a ball. They try to picture how bad it was. And he likes school? He goes early? Everyone turns to stare at Hoban, who has spoken these words. They keep staring at him, waiting for him to say he was kidding, but Hoban says nothing else, and they turn their attention back at this kid in the yellow hat. At last, Bond says, so let's get a game. Everybody breaks the trance. Yeah, Tuttle says, game, game. Kids who want to play come running. Teams are chosen. Tuttle and Bonds are the captains. They flip fingers for a first pick, and Tuttle wins. Hoban, he says. Jansky, says Bonds. They go on choosing sides. Tuttle's here, Bonds there, until only one kid is left in the yellow hat. But the sides are even. Tuttle and Bonds have each chosen 7 kids. Yellow hat is a leftover. But this kid is not acting like a leftover. A normal leftover would see that he's too many, that everyone but him has been picked, and that therefore he must be pretty hopeless, and therefore he better just get out of there and go play something he's good at, like Monopoly. But this kid just stands there. He shows no sign of turning and vanishing, and he's not standing there. He's staring at Tuttle and Bonds. Tuttle says, we got enough. So the kid is just staring at Bonds, and Bonds wants to say, we got enough, but he can't. He can't seem to say it. He wishes the kid would just turn and go away. Doesn't he know that he's a leftover? Hoban's voice rings out from the other side. Tackle! They usually play two-hand tag. There are no pads, no helmets, and half the field is muddy from the melted snow, but no one objects. No one wants to appear to be afraid to play tackle. And Jansky speaks. The sides are even up. We don't need anybody else. The kid does not take the hint. This is uncharted territory. A leftover who won't go away. Still, Bonds holds the power. All he has to do is open his mouth. Please go, he thinks, but the kid is staring at Bonds. The kid really is stupid. The kid doesn't know that even if he's allowed, he's only going to be ignored or embarrassed or hurt. He doesn't know that he's a klutz, doesn't know he's out of his league, doesn't know a leftover doesn't stare down a chooser. Doesn't know he's supposed to look down at his shoes or up at the sky and wish he could disappear because that's what he is, a leftover, the last kid left. But this kid won't back off, and his stare is hitting Bonds like a football in the forehead. In those eyes, Bonds sees something he doesn't understand and something else he dimly remembers. It occurs to him that he wants to ask the kid what it was like. Those 7 hours. He thinks he must be able to see them in the kid's eyes, some sign of them, but he cannot. He wants to ask the kid what it was like being that cold. This is goofy, he thinks. He thinks of 1,000 things to say, 1,000 other ways this could go, but in the end, there's really only one word. He knows that. One word from him. Who knows where we go from here? He points and says it. Zinkoff. And the game begins. Why did Bonds hear something that the other kids didn't hear? Why did he want to know something that the other kids didn't want to know? I'm really asking. When you're a powerful kid in middle school, that's about as much power as you're ever going to get. I mean, being the president of the United States, you've got Congress to yell at you. But if you're a really powerful kid, if you're a socially on top kid in middle school, you rule. And Bonds is one of these kids. And Zinkoff is the ultimate not that guy. Zinkoff is this kid that really can't get anything done well. He has no idea what he's going to be, but he's not really letting it crush him. And what he cares about, he puts into action. He's a middle school kid who spends 7 hours in the snow looking for a kid because he couldn't stand the idea of somebody else having to sit by a window for a person that was never coming home. And he nearly dies, a middle school kid. And this fact, which he doesn't ever brag about or talk about, has hit this other kid, Bonds, and he doesn't understand it. But then it becomes the only thing he can think about. Why does Bonds hear that? Why is Bonds affected by that, and the other kids aren't? I'm really asking that question. Go ahead.
Fear.
What does that mean?
Like Bonds has probably never been afraid of, like, for his own safety. But Zinko, I think. Zinkoff.
Yeah.
Has been like through the playground, but he went further than the playground.
Yeah, if you're the king of the playground, you're strong, you're capable, you also have this, anybody who's ever been a serious athlete knows that it's scary being the one with the ball when the game is on the line. And you have to learn how to face that kind of fear of having everything come down to you. It's one of the best things about sports, you can practice that moment of courage. They used to call it grace under pressure. And he can do that. Bonds is that kind of kid. But he hasn't ever put everything on the life, really. So why does he hear it and the other kids don't? The other kids are still calling him a spaz.
His position's being challenged.
How? You're right. How is that happening?
It's not only his aspect as king of the playground, but it's his foundation, which he bases himself on.
This idea that I've got things under control. Anybody else? If that's true, then the other kids, one of the kids knows Zinkoff from grade school. And still he's treating him like nothing. Go ahead.
You hide behind the person who's got the most power. So with one person having the ultimate yay or nay, every other kid can make fun and not really have any repercussions because they're not the ones held responsible for the decision made.
So because they're so powerful, they can get away with it. So why doesn't he get away with it? Why does he picks the kid, even though it doesn't make any sense. And he picks him because there's something about Zinkoff. There's something about this story. And now we're into the theme of what I'm talking about. I've got a watch here, so I better warn you. I'm all wound up. I could go on for hours, but I'm not. How many people have seen this thing happen in life all the time? Something major happens, and some people hear it and they're changed forever. They're just never the same person anymore. And other people hear exactly the same story, and they go and have lunch, and nothing changes. I once I knew a guy who had been a community organizer in Kansas City, and he was 3 or 4 years ahead of me at graduate school at Iowa, and man, he was a smart guy, and he was a great teacher. I would sit out in the hallway and watch him teach and engage with people. I was taking notes about how he would answer questions and how much time he would use between this joke and that joke. I watched hard because this guy was the guy I wanted to be. And I was having lunch with him one day, and he said, he started telling the story about how he used to go around to the various really poor parts of Kansas City, and he got to this one tenement building, and he knew all the families there, and he helped them out. It was his job to be an advocate for the poor, an agent for the poor of Kansas City. And he started noticing when he went to this building that every single family kept a hammer by the toilet. Right. Why would there be a hammer by the toilet? If you've heard this story, you can't answer this. Why? Why would there be a hammer by the toilet? How many people are sitting here right now going, I have no idea why a toilet needs a hammer? How many people are going like... And so he asks the poor fool, he says, why do you all have a hammer by the toilet? And they go, to break the ice in the morning. Because the owner of the tenement building figured out that it was cheaper to pay the fine for not putting oil in the building than to put oil in the building. And it changed him. It changed the kind of person he was, the story. Says and he went down to the city hall to try to fix it, and he found out the hard way that nobody was interested in helping him fix it. And so they all kept their hammers by the toilet, because every single night the tenement building got so cold in Kansas City that the toilet would freeze. Right in the middle of the United States of America. And it changed that guy. Now I'm sure a million other people heard that story, but this one guy got changed. I used to work over at Newman College, and Newman College is big into St. Francis. And St. Francis, they have these signs all over the place at that college that goes, preach the gospel always, and if necessary, use words. The idea being that it's really not a message that you talk about, it's a message that you live, thought St. Francis and Newman College and some other people I've met. But I think that's a little bit what Bonce is seeing in Zinkoff. Bonce is seeing something that he doesn't understand. Bonce is seeing something that changes who he is when he sees it. I just came from a movie about Eva Kor, Marie Kahn put on. And Eva has been around a long time. She was one of the Mengele victims, survivors. She had, Eva Kor, back then Eva Moses, had been somebody who, I don't know if you know who Dr. Mengele is, but he was a Nazi sadistic doctor who liked to experiment on people. They were going to kill anyone anyway. And Eva was one of the people he experimented on, and she survived. And she was angry for decades. I don't think angry is a strong enough word. She was enraged for decades. Until finally one day she'd had it. She just had it with being enraged. She had it with being angry. She had it with being outraged. She had it with being felt like the world had done an injustice to her. And we're talking Birkenau. We're talking Auschwitz. We're talking the Holocaust. She just had it with being angry about injustice, and so she quit. And she forgave him. and everything changed. She had no idea that it would. And then she started setting up this, she has in Terre Haute, Indiana, she has a museum for the survivors of Dr. Mengele and for the twins that were there. And these two women came in one day, and they had been the victims of sexual assault. And the two of them, we hear later, were near to suicide. And they're talking to Eva, and Eva says, you know what? You can just forgive them. And they're like, how dare you? How dare you? People hate Eva for forgiving the Nazis. How dare you? You don't have the right to forgive the Nazis. The Nazis are the Nazis. We use the word Nazi to explain how bad the Nazis are. They're like Nazis. No, they are the Nazis. And she says, you know, I didn't forgive Mengele for me. I mean, for him. I forgave him for me. It released me. It gave me back a life that I had lost. And she said that to these two girls that were sitting there near to suicide, she said, you can do that too. You can just give yourself back your life and not have to live in outrage. You can do that. That's something you can do. It's something in your agency quiver. It's a thing you can choose. The things that happened to you, you didn't choose. You didn't have a say in it. But releasing yourself from the outrage. So I talked to Eva myself personally about this over dinner about 5 years ago. And I said, I don't think the word forgiveness is right. She goes, you're the first person to say that to me. And you're right, I hate it. That's not the right word. But I don't have anything closer. So I use the word forgive. But really what it is releasing myself from the outrage of the injustice. Through some sort of means of not being mad at him anymore in the same way. I don't forget what happened. I have a tattoo, she says, and she showed me the tattoo. I don't forget. But these two young ladies who were near to suicide heard her story, and it made all the difference. The work I'm doing right now, the research I'm doing right now, has to do with the nature of human identity and its relationship to time. How are we the individuals that we are? And one of the theories that I've been coming across and I've been working with, this is the idea that we are stories. This guy, everyone laughs when I say his name. This guy's name is Martin Buber. It's his name, Martin Buber. And he says, you know, you have to realize that you aren't the individual you think you are. You have to come to realize that who you are is who you are with the people you love. How many people have actually had that moment where you're like one kind of person with one group of people and another kind of person with that group of people over there? Like you're this kind of person with your drinking friends. No, sorry, we're dry campus. There's no drinking friends here. And then some of the drinking friends meet some of the sober friends, and they're like, wait, Karen's not like that. Buber says, look, you want to know who you really are? You are who you are in the space between you and the people. His book is called I and Thou, right? You are who you are with the environment, with your friends, with your family, with the people you don't like. If you really, really hate somebody, even if they really deserve it, you are who you are with that. You're never just you. You're always who you are with. Martin Buber said that in the middle of the 20th century. And then this other guy, a guy named Paul Ricoeur, says, look, if you really want to understand the past, the present, and the future, you have to understand the one thing that brings them all together. And that's narrative, that's story. The past, the present, and the future are all unified, all drawn together like parts in a quilt in a story. If you pick up, you know, how many people have noticed that every time you pick up Romeo and Juliet, they die. Every time. Every time I pick that up, I'm like, maybe this time. And I'm like, crap, they died again, right? So somehow when I get into a story, into the flow of a narrative, it somehow, if it's a story I really, really love, it starts to spark with the scent of reality, as if, again, this is all happening for the first time. How many people have had that experience with a book you love, or a play you love, or a movie you love? You turn it on and you're like, I'm going to pretend I don't know what happens at the end. Wait a minute. He's his father? And partly by this moment where you put it off, you go into the drama, into the narrative, into the story again, as if it's past, present, and future that you're living through right now. It's magical. It's incredibly magical to grab a story and to pop in at the beginning again, and you're in the middle of it as if it's happening for the first time again. So seriously, how many people have your favorite story that you like to tell, or a favorite novel, or a favorite movie, a favorite play that it's your guilty pleasure maybe, and you're like, pull it out, and you're like, I'm gonna read it again, right? And you pop back into it. It's magical, right? How many people have a book like that or a movie like that where you like to pop yourself right back into that story? Well, you're a story too. In fact, you understand yourself as a story. You have a past, you have a now, and much, much more important, Ricoeur would yell at me for saying that, but much, much more important, you have a future that's as yet undetermined. And you understand yourself as story, just as you understand yourself as with the people that you're in relationships with. I am who I am with. How many people remember what I just said about that? How many people have had that hit home? You're like, holy crap, that's freaking true. I am who I am I'm not myself. I am who I am with my family. I am who I am with my friends. I am who I am with the people I trust. I am who I am with the people I do not trust. I hate to admit that, but I am. But I'm also a story. And the thing about Romeo and Juliet is, and I hate to tell you this, spoiler, the ending's always going to stay the same. I checked. Your story isn't, though. The coolest thing about being existential, Romeo and Juliet don't exist, except for as characters in a story that somebody thought up. And so the story goes around and around and around and around in the same way. It never changes. Once you write it down, that's the story. You can change it if you want to later. It's one of the coolest things about video game dramas, video game plots. You can move around a little bit. But your story, which you possess with sovereign ownership and control. I am the sovereign holder of the plot of my story. That is being written right now. And one of the things that's starting to appear is that I use other people's stories as a way of envisioning my own. Most people have a mother tongue. How many people have a mother tongue? Can I see hands up? How many people have English as a mother tongue? Right. How many people have some other language as a mother tongue? All right. Sometimes you go from one language to another, and all of a sudden you start dreaming in the other language. It's quite freaky. I was just in Iceland. I started dreaming in Icelandic, and I don't speak that language. It's very odd. But you did not give yourself your language. You found yourself inside the language you were born into. And because of it, you have this whole tool chest of ideas and expressions that you can express yourself with and understand other people with. But you didn't build it. You didn't earn it. It was just given to you. It was just where you happen to be when you were acquiring language. How many people get that idea, right? Do you follow? You find yourself in a context in which language is part of the culture that you receive almost like a gift or a grace. For better or for worse, maybe it's a terrible language. I'm struggling with Icelandic. I'm not working that hard at it. How many people get that idea, right? I don't build my language, I receive it. It's something I get, like a Christmas present from Santa. What we also get, and this is the point, this is why I'm talking to you today, stories. Not just the big ones, right? Like the archetypal stories, like the Iliad and the Odyssey and all this. But little stories like Zinkoff. Stories of other people I know. My dad was a geologist, and when I was a little kid, he used to love to tell us a story about going on rock hunting tours in Arizona in the summer. You can see right from the beginning that's a bad idea, right? Where are you going? Arizona. When? Summer. Right? So one day, being the enterprising teenager that he was at the time, he thought that it would be cool to take home a rattlesnake skin because it was the early 60s. And that was, he thought that was a cool idea. But he didn't bring a knife with him, so he battled this rattlesnake and cut its head off with a stone, which took about a half an hour and was not a pretty picture. And it was 120 degrees, and he forgot to bring water, and he was exhausted. And so he's jogging back to home camp with this dead rattlesnake in his hands. And the thing didn't stay dead. And it starts to try to hit him without a head. At which point he freaks out. And he throws the thing, and he comes back all freaked out. And they're like, what happened? He goes, you'll never believe it. This dead rattlesnake attacked me. They're like, okay, excuse me, what? Had no head. That's not helping at all. But I heard that story a million times, right? I literally heard that story a million times. I know you're going to, like, no, not a million. No, seriously, I heard it a million times. Just like I had to go to the Old North Church a million times when I was a kid, because I'm from Boston. But you get a language and you get a series of stories. How many people have family stories that you're like, I'm not telling you my family story? But how many people have a few of those whopper cool stories that you have from your family? And you know, even your best friends, they have a different quiver of stories, right? And sometimes you tell your friend you have some of your best stories, and that's what makes them your good friend. I'm going to tell you one of my best stories. Here it is, right? And you tell the stories. But what I'm trying to get into is this idea that, look, you have a future that is yet undetermined, and part of the way that you go about determining what it is you're going to do with your sovereign freedom is to make it into a story. But in order to do that, you pick stories that you have in your background. You pick little bits out of the stories and go, here's a story that I like, here's a story that I like, and these stories become part of how you envision your own real future. So, I have another book. You may recognize it. I don't usually get to do this, right? So it's agape, so I figured there's a little kind of a spiritual edge to this. So I'm in the Gospel of Mark. I won't be as long as the Zinkoff one. It's going to be shorter. All right, I'm at chapter 13, verse 3. Hold on. Oh, sorry. I remember I knew I'd make a mistake. And Jesus began to speak to them in parables. What's a parable? Hear what I'm saying? You get it? You ever see the sewing things together? A man planted a vineyard and set a hedge around it and dug a pit for the winepress and built a tower and let it out to tenants and went into another country. When the time came, he sent a servant to the tenants to get from them some of the fruit from the vineyard. And they took him and beat him, and they sent him away empty-handed. And again he sent to them another servant, and they wounded him in the head and treated him shamefully. And he sent another, and they killed him. And so with many others. Soon they beat, and some they killed. And he had still one other, a beloved son. Who's telling the story? Jesus. Finally he sent him, saying, they will respect my son. But those tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. And they took him and killed him, and they cast him out of the vineyard. What will the owner of the vineyard do? Right, so Jesus is telling a story that may be a metaphor of what's about to happen to him, himself. He says, I get it. I know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen to me. It's like Martin Luther King the day before he got killed. He says, I may not get there with you. Remember that? Right, how many people have heard that? The day before Martin Luther King died, he gave a speech about sanitation workers, to some sanitation workers. And he says, we got to get to the promised land. I may not get there with you. So he was telling you he already knew how it was going to end. So let's go to where it ends. Now we're over at, 14, verse 32. And they went to a place which was called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. And he took with him Peter and James and John and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. This is Jesus being greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. He's saying this to his friends. Jesus, who always seems to have it together, is saying to his friends, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch. And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible to thee. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what thou wilt. And he came and found them sleeping. He said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch in 1 hour? Now at this school, right here at this school, you could walk down this hallway and up the steps, and on the 3rd floor of St. Joe's, there's a window, and the window is Jesus and an angel is bringing a cup. It's this scene right here, Gethsemane. This is without doubt my favorite. That paragraph right there is my favorite of this entire book. That right there is my favorite because I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to be so afraid that I may not be able to follow through with the story. Then maybe I'm not as cool as Zinkoff. Maybe I can't handle 7 hours in the cold sun. I'm falling asleep with one eye open. And I fall in the snow and maybe I die. I know what that feels like, to be that afraid and that uncertain as to whether or not I can hold true to the story that I envision. I can relate to that guy. I've been that afraid. Now, the story goes on. I'm not sure I can go through with what he went through, but I know what it's like to be that afraid, that uncertain, that, listen, can I get a pass? This is getting a little over my head now. How many people have been that just here at college? There's a paper due tomorrow. Can I have this cup pass from me? Please? Or finals weeks come, right? We're far enough from finals week that I can talk about it without making people like have heart attacks, right? How many people have been in the middle of finals week going, I'm going to die. You can't drink this much coffee. Or I'm going to fail and then my parents are going to kill me. One way or another, this is not turning out so good. And this is just college. Sorry. I didn't mean to say it that way. I get it. So how do you get the courage to follow through with the story of your life that you envision from the stories you heard? How do you be the Jesus at the Jesus moment? How do you be the Zinkoff at the Zinkoff moment? How many people are sitting right here hearing this speech and going, yeah, I do. I have a story I want to see come true in my life. Or at least I have an image of a story. I have an inkling. I know somewhere, I know what part of the field of baseball, I'm a right fielder. At least I know that. Other people are like, I want a story. I don't have a story. I want a story. In fact, my story right now is my desperation for my story. I don't have a story, but I want one more than anything. I want to have some idea of what I'm going to do with my sovereign freedom and responsibility into the future. I get to write my story, and it won't be just some fiction story. It'll be the real thing. The best thing there is, a real story, a real lived story, a story that when you're coming near to the life, you look back and go, that was a story, that was the story. I lived the way I thought I might be able to. See what I'm doing here? I'm not telling you how to live. I don't know how you're supposed to live. I don't know what your story's supposed to be. I'm never, ever going to tell you that I should know. You do, though. You have to figure it out. And the thing that you have to work with is the stories you've heard. Now, I'm going to say 2 more things. I'm going to be done. They're going to be really short. You can pick terrible stories. I was just watching that Eva Kor movie, and she set up this museum in Terre Haute, Indiana, and someone who was a fan of Tim McVeigh, the guy who bombed the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, he decided it was a good idea to firebomb Eva Kor's Jewish museum. I'm not a fan of that story. It's a story. You can pick it. I'm not a fan. I don't usually talk like that. How many people see that? But people pick terrible stories and make their lives into those stories. Put your hand up if you understand what I just said. So, and here's the last thing, and this is something you may have heard if you've taken a class with me before. Aristotle came up with an idea 300 and something years before Jesus was born and said, look, people want three things. They want to feel safe and secure, probably with a little bit of pleasure. Chocolate's usually good. People also want to be popular. People want to be socially accepted. It's good not to be Zinkoff. But most of all, said Aristotle, is that what we want is a life that makes sense to us as we judge it ourselves. He called this life the life of individually defined excellence, or the life of, his Greek word was eudaimonia. I want to live the life that is the most appropriate, excellent life as I myself would determine that. I want to live that life. I want to live the life that is me maxed out. Not as my parents think about it or my friends think about it or the culture thinks about it, but I want to live the life that when I sit on my deathbed and look back, that I go, that was it. That was it on the nose. That is the life that I wanted to leave. I didn't know if I had the courage for it, but I stuck it through. I developed the skills I needed to. I was courageous when it needed to be. I was tough when it needed to be. And it became what I thought I might be able to become. But you have to pick a story. Last thing. In order to do that, you have to be sure you're going to be sitting on your deathbed. One of the things that happens out here in the general culture is that we think about death, but only as a, someday kind of thing. I don't mean to be morbid here. But in order to figure out what you really want to do, and in order to get busy getting the skills you need, the excellence you need, the training you need to get to the excellence that you're capable of, you've got to come to an understanding that time is running out. I used to be a track runner. And in order to run track, like if you're running the 400 or the 800, you've got to run just below full blast until you're going into your final sprint, and then you throw the hammer down. How many of you understand what I'm talking about? You can't go full blast the whole way, but you got to hold it and hold it and hold it, and then boom, time to pull everything out for the final lap and get there to the finish line. And part of the trick is, did you start too early? It's one of the most embarrassing things in track, right? You got a lap and a half to go. You're like, all right, I got this mile. I'm feeling good. And all of a sudden, you're like, yeah, I'm hitting the gas right now with 600 meters to go. And all your friends go, oh no. That is a failure of judgment, Patrick. No, I got it. I'm good. Coming into lead. I got the lead. I've only got 200 yards to go. Wait. Patrick, you started your sprint a little too early. I'm like, duh. But in order to do that, in order to figure out how to max out your skill in track, you have to know that there's an end to the race, which means you've got to throw into the race everything you got relative to the time you've got to fill in. I got to be as fast as I can for 400 meters, or as fast as I can for 800 meters, or fast as I can for a mile. But you've got to put it inside those boundaries. And then you go for the sprint inside those boundaries, right? And then when the race is over, it's over. Time to go out and get a soda, right? Life is like that. You have this much time. What does maxed out look like to you? And when are you going to come to understand that it's time to get busy? I got to start looking at my stories, thinking about who I want to be, starting to put myself, like, this is the future that I envision for myself. And I don't have much time because life is short and I got stuff to do before I'm dead. Thank you very much.
So can we get one more gigantic round of applause for Dr. McCauley? So now we're going to open it up to you guys. We can take about 3 or 4 questions if you guys have any for Dr. McCauley.
Do you feel that as Americans, youths nowadays tend to burn out or like not start at all? Like it kind of feels like we're always at an extreme. Like we're never, like what you're saying with the running, we're not holding back to the last sprint. It's like we're always running or we're not.
That's kind of one of the point I was trying to make is that humans in general, your generation in particular, have a tendency to dissipate yourself in every direction. I'm in the school play, I'm on the team, I'm doing double major with a minor, I've got friends that are miserable because their boyfriend just dumped them, and so we're up to 2 o'clock in the morning going, well, your life will mean something someday, right? Right? Like, can we go to sleep now? No! My life is over. What does 3 o'clock in the morning matter? And you're like, I have a chemistry test. You're like, the look on your face is like, that happened to me last week. Last night. Sorry. So what do, right? How many people can relate to that thing? You're like moving in a million different directions at once, and the stress is everywhere you look. You're like, oh, look, more stress. I'm going to leave that stress, and I'm like, oh, stress over here, right? And so I'm going to, oh, there's stress back there, right? And there's like no place in your life where you put on some movie that you think is going to anti-stress you, it reminds you of the English thing. Oh, that reminds me of, damn it, more stress, right? I once had this student in class years and years ago. It must have been like 2000, 2001, and she asked me if she could bring her daughter to class one night, right? And she brings her daughter to class, and she's like this shining star of a human being, right? She can play classical music, she can play jazz, like we just were hearing before. But she was also an actress, and she was a stand-up comedian, and she was also doing a biology degree, right? And so this was a 4-hour class, and she stayed to the end, and she wanted to talk to me, and I'm like, she said, do you have a couple minutes to talk? And I'm like, sure. She says, yeah, my life is great. I'm so good at like 10 things. And I'm like, 10 things? She goes, yeah, it's hard. I'm like, I bet. I said, I said, do you mind if I get personal? She goes, that's why I'm here. I said, I'm going to get mean. She goes, bring it on. There's nothing that's going to bother me. I'm like, it will. No, I'm cool. I'm like, so you're happy with B+? And she's like, what the heck are you talking about? I'm like, if you dissipate yourself across 10 endeavors, there's not a single one of them that's going to be excellent. And I bet you're already figuring that out. She's like, I really don't like you. You're a very mean man. And so I said, why are you doing that? Why are you intentionally, there's a terrible image from the Odyssey. This is character Penelope, who's the wife of Ulysses. By the way, do you know what that word means, Ulysses? It means man of constant sorrow. That's his name. Hi, my name is Fred. What's your name? I am Constant Sorrow. Well, she's waiting at home, Penelope is, and these dudes want to marry her and acquire her land, metaphorically and literally. And she's trying to put them off because she thinks that Ulysses is eventually going to come home. Meanwhile, Telemachus, the son, is getting impatient about the whole thing. So she says, I'll put together this tapestry, and when I'm done, I'll pick one of you. And they're like, okay, and they go away. She's like, great plan. And then she's making the tapestry, like, I'm going to finish this thing. I can't have that happen because I don't have to pick one of them. So at night, she starts unweaving it all the time. And so we often do that. We often, during the day, build a project, and at night, take it apart. And by dissipating yourself across many, many different disciplines at once, you prevent yourself from focusing on that which deserves your time. But part of the reason you do that, look, and this is me being mean, just like I was today, is because you're afraid of what would happen if you put yourself full blast into something, because it may turn out that you don't have the goods. Do you know what I mean? And so so if you're doing 10 different things, it's like you have your feet on a bunch of different bases at once. So if one of them or 8 of them doesn't turn out, you got those last 2. But if you really want to be great at violin, or you really want to be great at field hockey, or you really want to be great at physical chemistry or something like that, eventually you're going to have to go, okay, what would this look like if I went full blast at the giving up of everything, of almost everything else? I'm a bad person to ask this question because my degree is in 3 different things. I could never, right? Philosophy, theology, and lit. They're like, when are you going to pick? I'm like, not picking. I want the whole basket. But for me, it was one thing. It was just different facets of the same jewel, right? And I gave up science to do it. It was one of the hardest decisions of my life. And I also gave up film to do it. And that was an even harder decision. I don't know if it was even harder. It was at least as hard. I was an animator, and I loved it. And every once in a while, I catch a glimpse of the person I would have been had I gone down the animation path. And I don't hate that, and so I miss it. There's like a person that I would have been, and I live in a kind of a missing of who I remember what it felt like. I remember what I felt like, and it could have been the truth. But in order to figure out who I was here doing this, what I just did now, I had to sell that, right? Do you follow? And it was hard. But if you want to know what excellence looks like, your own personally defined excellence, you eventually have to start to going, okay, when am I going to get serious? Which of these stories is my story? Not all of them. Yeah, sometimes eventually, it's kind of like picking someone to marry. You don't like pick 3. I'm going to pick you, Bob, Fred, and John, because 2 of you might be terrible. So I'm going with 3 to hedge my bets, right? Well, your life, your story is a little bit like that. Eventually you have to decide how is a Horcruxes. You have to decide one way or the other. You have to decide whether you're not going to chase after the hobbits. Or, you eventually have to pick this road or that road. And then you go full blast in that direction. But if you sit at the crossroads forever, you get nothing done, right? So that stress thing you were talking about earlier is sometimes a matter of going, okay, I'm old enough to start to ask myself serious questions about not what I'm doing, but what I'm not going to do, so that I can focus down more accurately on what I am going to do. The point where you're starting to go to graduate school is a really excellent time to start asking those questions. Right? Part of the point of undergraduate school is to test the waters all over the place, so that when you're thinking about maybe getting a master's degree in something, it can be more like, I really love social work, or I really love, practical psychology or something like that, right? But those kind of questions, which are also and terribly questions about what you're going to have to sell and give up. I have a French horn in my house. I played it in the 80s, I think. I used to be good. I was like a state competitor of French horn, and I bought one after I graduated from Iowa. I'm like, I'm going to buy a French horn, and I bought it. And it sits there in a case like a mausoleum, And I'm like, I'm going to eventually have time to play the French horn. Because I know how to, okay, look, there's not time for this because this is taking precedence. There's too many things that, so knowing how to prioritize and then knowing how to prune, right? Like, I'm not doing this, right? I'm going to be doing that. And because I'm doing that, this is going to have to be redefined. Look, and I'm not teaching class right now. I'm in the middle of Agape Latte. Sometimes friendships that are not helping you can be one of those things that's causing a lot of stress. There are people who, you remember, we are who we are with, right? But they are who they are with you also. Some people are givers. Some people are very generous. Some people are very loving. Some people have your back. And other people are sucking energy out of things that make more sense to you. I don't usually say stuff like that. But you're asking a difficult question. Right, do you see what I'm getting at, right? So the stress then becomes, look, stress is not in itself bad, right? Particularly with regard to you, Domineo. With regard to my individually defined excellence, I should be a little bit focused and determined and disciplined, which some people call stress. I don't usually call it that. I call it focused, determined, disciplined, right? I'm in, all right? That is not necessarily a negative thing. But when you're dispersed all over the place and everything's taking, Peter's robbing from Paul all the time, it can get really, really difficult to find anything out about yourself because you've got your feet on so many bases. Does that make any sense? It's a hard question.
Yeah, you talked about the idea of being who we are with.
Yeah.
And
Martin Buber.
get the idea the story from the culture that we are from.
Yeah.
Don't you think that that's limiting our
Limits, did you say?
limiting
Yeah.
in a sense, not more like existential?
Yeah.
Do you feel that?
No, there's no doubt about it. You can't help the stories you're born with, that your parents tell you and your culture tells you. There's this other thing that I really like. It's called a library, where they hold quite a lot of other stories. There's one right there. And that's the kind I'm comfortable with because I come from the 70s, right? How many people have a phone? Look, I just found out, I'm sorry, you're gonna laugh at me. I just found out that in 30 seconds, I needed to look up something today, right? I was like gonna get up and go to, I'm like, oh, crow, that book's in my library at the office. And I'm like, wait, I think the internet has this book. And in 30 seconds, I not only had Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, but I was searching it, right? And it was on the paragraph I needed to be in 25 seconds, right? For free. Well, for the whatever it costs me every month to have internet, you know. Do you see what I'm saying? So like every single one of you with a phone can access all manner of narrative, right? That's one of the things, that your cultural inheritance is not just the place you came from. Your cultural inheritance is every book you can get your hands on, every story you can get your hands on. And that's what I'm trying to tell you, is that you're not at the mercy of the place you were born to. You have the power to choose the stories that you will let guide your own story into the future.
I was thinking of maybe the story doesn't exist. So
Well, that's what I'm trying to tell you, is that that's kind of the point, right? The idea is that you put in a patchwork quilt plots from other people, stories from other people, narratives from other people, and you put them together like a quilt, right? Little bits and little bits, little bits, right? And so, look, one of the things that I think that's really confusing about this, and I was thinking about adding it to this, but it was already getting long, is the idea that the thing that I'm talking about is neither plagiarism nor originality. Neither plagiarism nor originality, right? So the idea is that I pull, if I'm a quilter, the fabrics already exist. My mom's a master quilter, right? And I love to watch her work. She has this room filled with potential fabrics that aren't yet quilts, and she's now come to realize never will be, right? But she has this room like a painter's studio filled with colors, but they're all pieces of fabric from who knows where. You know, some of them are 100 years old or 200 years old. Some of them are just from last week, right? But she has this great big wall of greens and blues and oranges and reds. But somebody else made them, and somebody else wore them. They were on somebody else's dress or somebody else's curtains or something, and she repurposes them into a quilt that none of the fabrics themselves could ever have foretold the quilt that they would become a part of. So she takes what was somebody else's, and she shapes it and repurposes it into something that's completely new and unique, even though it's built on what she received from someone else's hand. And so that idea, so I just finished reading Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood, and that book is built on the structure of a quilt for this very reason, that it's pieces of stuff that you didn't invent, put together in a different way, such that the final product is brand new, even though the pieces are the exact opposite of brand new. All right, so that neither plagiarism nor complete originality. You were doing it up here just with the piano just now, right? The piece was already there, right? Not only that, other people had jazzed it before. But as far as I could tell, that was the one and only time it's ever been played like that. I mean, you know, right? You're in the practice room, you played this stuff before, but never just like that. I saw you change it right in the middle of it. I heard you like you were that first piece that you were playing, right? That was that from the 30s, right? Right? I heard you decide to change where you were going with it about 2/3 of the way through, right? And you changed the rhythm a little bit, and you changed, you know, the syncopation just a little bit. Am I right about that? Right? Did you do that before? Isn't that cool? Right? So it's you took it and made it something new, even though the pieces were already there, even in your own hand, under your own fingers, right? So the idea of building your own story is that quilt project where you take the borrowed, right, from your culture, and you cut it up and make it into a quilt that's never existed before, right? Narrative. That's kind of the point. Narrative is both the story I heard and the story I make. Come on, it's got to be somebody else. Good? Good? Anybody? Okay. Somebody has been taking calligraphy. Excellence is under our nose.
All right, one last final thank you to Dr. McCauley. I know all of us truly appreciate taking your time out of your sabbatical to come up and bestow us with your wisdom.